This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
If we don't get our pain treated, people don't have their pain well treated, then pain will capture their time, attention, and energy. If we do that stuff right, if we get the hospice care and the palliative care parts right, if we get just general medical care right and personal and attentive, not just to diseases, but to people's well-being, then we free them to live fully during this difficult, unwanted, but normal part of human life.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. My guest today is hospice and palliative physician Dr. Ira Byock. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode of The Heart of Hospice is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata's motto is, "Care is treatment." They've made it their mission to transform the end-of-life experience for the patient and caregivers through education and support. With 50 free YouTube videos that teach bedside care and their booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, Odonata Care is revolutionizing the hospice experience. Visit thecareplan.net for more information.
My guest today really doesn't need an introduction, although I'm going to give it just to let everybody know the work that he's doing. But Dr. Ira Byock is a leading palliative care physician, author, and public advocate for improving care through the end of life. He's the founder of the Institute for Human Caring at Providence St. Joseph Health. He's been involved in hospice and palliative care since 1978, and he is also a past president of the Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. Dr. Byock's first book, Dying Well, came out in 1997, and it's a standard in the field of hospice and palliative care. In 2004, he published another book called The 4 Things That Matter Most, and it's used as a counseling tool by palliative care and hospice programs, as well as within pastoral care. His most recent book is The Best Care Possible, and it tackles the crisis that surrounds serious illness and dying in America. You're going to love my conversation with Dr. Byock. Ira, as he's known to his friends and his colleagues, he's a dedicated, outspoken, pragmatic, practical advocate for quality end-of-life care. And I think what he believes in is the healing starts at home. We need to fix ourselves as hospice providers from the inside out. So here's my conversation with Dr. Ira Byock. Ira, thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's an honor to be able to talk with you today. I'm going to ask you an icebreaker question. Doesn't have anything to do with hospice, and so it's a little bit of a surprise. What is something about you that most people don't know?
Boy, I don't know what people know about me. So let's see. I'm a guy with 2 daughters, 2 grandsons. That's a large portion of what defines, I think, who I am to myself. I think I'm a unipolar manic trapped in the body of a lazy person. Or maybe I should say that the other way around. I'm a lazy person trapped in the body of a unipolar manic. So I've done a lot of things, but usually I'd like to be taking a nap.
I like that. I might share that in common with you. So you have been a hospice and palliative care physician for many years. And when you think back when you started in the industry working with patients at end of life, what have you seen change? How have you seen hospice care evolve during your time?
Oh, dramatically. I mean, I'm old enough that when I was a family practice resident in Fresno, California, hospice was, barely starting in the United States. There was one fledgling hospice program in Fresno, which was part of my development because I was the first person from the county hospital's safety net teaching center to ever refer a patient to this hospice. It was at St. Agnes Hospital. And they were delighted and surprised and delighted and came over to meet me, both to thank me for making the referral and to make sure I didn't do it too often. And that was part of my beginning, actually, because they encouraged me to do something for the county system. Now, I was just a resident at the time, and so I was trying to figure out how to keep people in this safety net, very busy county hospital, from falling through the cracks, from getting lost in ways that the county health nurses wouldn't be able to find them from one week to another because they move from one to another of extended families' homes, and or I would see them in the emergency department when I rotated through the ER as in my residency. And I'd meet people who had been waiting 3 to 4 or more hours to get their Tylenol with codeine refilled because they didn't have a doctor. And they had been discharged from the medical center, but they had nobody to follow them. And, or I'd see them in Surgery C clinic. I remember meeting a woman in Surgery C clinic where I was the resident to see her that day. And she had a liver full of colon cancer, but didn't have an assigned doctor to her. She just came to the clinica. We've come a long way since that. I mean, I'm talking about, the realm of 78, 79, 1980. The Medicare benefit came into being in 1982. And although it took some time, gradually, hospice had moved from a social movement to an interesting prototypical model for caring for people, mostly nursing care for people who were acknowledged to be dying, to, frankly, an industry and an integral component of America's healthcare continuum. So it's come an enormous way. And as you may know, although I celebrate this influence in access to hospice care, in the stature we hold within American healthcare, and the fact that we've now hospice and palliative medicine as a formal subspecialty, and we've got textbooks and journals, and some of us are professors, and on and on. All of that is kind of unbelievable. I mean, it's really remarkable. And Americans are still dying badly. Way too often. And maybe we'll talk about this, Helen. I don't know where you want to go with this conversation, but hospice in more than a few circumstances has become part of the challenges and part of the problems that seriously ill and dying people have to navigate.
I absolutely do want to talk about this. So a lot of people that work in end-of-life hospice and palliative care are aware of an article that came out in ProPublica, the New Yorker article that came out last year. And it exposed and described a lot of very heinous acts in hospice, highlighted the warts, the underbelly that we have, our weaknesses, and frankly painted the hospice industry in a very bad light here in the United States. And you wrote an article for Stat magazine online, where you talked about the differences in the quality of care that have developed between for-profit and nonprofit hospice agencies. how do you think that this, I don't want to say division, but this disparity that's becoming obvious between for-profit and nonprofit, how do you think this influences how the public is going to engage in hospice, whether or not they utilize hospice care?
So I want to reframe this just a little bit as we discuss it, because I understand it somewhat differently, though you've got it mostly right. I think Ava Kaufman's ProPublica New Yorker article, which came out in November of 2022, really highlighted some pretty flagrant fraud and abuse in hospice care, in frankly, just utterly, in some regards, criminally fraudulent companies and practices. And I think her pretty extensive investigative reporting, backed up by quite a few governmental studies, one of which at least I will call attention to in a little bit, was devastating and deserves both public attention and a robust response from those of us in this field, as well as those people in the industry, the provider industry. My own article in Stat, which came out in December of last year, really focused on problems of quality in hospice care, high variability in quality in hospice care, not fraud. And something that I've been watching occur and increase in prevalence over the years. I'm not the only one, but I can tell you I personally have spoken innumerable times to the within committees and to when I was invited to talk with a board of directors of the various associations, and in whenever I had access to closed door meetings. Well, one of the things I kept emphasizing is we need to set our own standards. We're really, people are using our name, purporting to provide good care, and we don't have a metric. We don't have any yardstick to provide to the public or referring clinicians or the accountability agencies or anything. Come on, what's keeping us from doing that? And it has eroded confidence in the public, but also in the referring clinicians and the discharge planners. And I think the industry, I keep emphasizing that word because I want to distinguish it from the clinical field that we are, but also our associations, NHPCO, NOC, the Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, have been very late in calling attention to these deficits. So I worry about this a lot. I think there's a way through this, but I am, and I see some progress in the response of the field and the industry in the wake of the public attention that has happened, but it's really late. And to this moment, having the day we're having this discussion, it's still woefully insufficient.
There's a lot to unpack in the conversation.
Yeah.
There absolutely is. And I think my first impression was reading the Stat article. It's more about how are we defining for ourselves what we are supposed to look like? What's a caseload supposed to look like? Even as a case manager, how many patients are you supposed to carry? As a consultant, I've had several agencies reach out to me and say, how many patients should a nurse have? What's a safe caseload? And then you hear horror stories about, a nurse has 20, 25 patients in a caseload.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've done in response to this mess, this kerfuffle, and my Stat article was, I'd say, variably received by the associations. They gulped, and I think to some extent wanted to cancel me, but I'm just old enough and I'm well published enough that they can't cancel me. They had to deal with me. They had to talk with me. Was to draft an article that has just come out 2 days ago in the Journal of Palliative Medicine online ahead of print, called Core Roles and Responsibilities of Physicians in Hospice Care. And the subtitle is A Statement by and for U.S. hospice and palliative medicine physicians. You will find some of that guidelines, if you will, or perspective on safe and effective caseloads within that article. The article is online ahead of print. Any of our listeners can Google it. It will be in the print edition of the May issue of Journal of Palliative Medicine, but it's called Core Roles and Responsibilities of Physicians in Hospice Care. I think the industry has been, I think, irresponsible in not putting out guidelines for what is reasonable caseloads for nurses, what is also reasonable doctor-patient relationships or ratios, in hospice care. In my stat article, I talked about, frankly, things that keep me up at night. I mean that literally, about quality in hospice care. And I would group them in the disappearance of doctors from active clinical practice in hospice, which is truly ironic because I can tell you from the beginning that was part of why we developed hospice programs in the United States, was to make sure that patients had access to doctors with the knowledge and skills and time to attend to them. And now, ironically, and with cruel irony, in many hospice programs, you won't see a doctor. You basically can't see a doctor.
True.
Their work agreements don't allow them to see patients, and there's not enough of them to do so. That's just bizarre and hurts my heart. The staffing ratios of nurses, I think, continue to be a problem. I've interviewed innumerable clinicians in the field and clinician administrators over the past year. Staffing is hard. It's hard to get nurses these days. It's hard to get experienced nurses. So you're getting, many of our nurses are less experienced than they used to be 10 years ago. But it's not uncommon to see nursing ratios of case managing hospice nurses carrying 15 to 20 patients. And, these are the sickest patients in our healthcare system, kind of by definition.
Right.
And it's simply, I know because I was a hospice medical director for years, and I've been, in this field since the late 70s, that it's untenable. It's just has no face validity. That any nurse could carry that much. So we're burning out our nurses. They have to go home and chart. They have moral distress because they couldn't make enough visits. Patients and families are wondering where the nurse is. Telephone visits are fine to complement or supplement home visits, but there's nothing that, completely replaces a visit to the home for lots of reasons. And I would sum up by saying, the other thing that really keeps me up at night is anecdotes that I know are not uncommon about emergencies at home, symptomatic emergencies that happen even during work hours, but particularly after work hours, nights, weekends, holidays, in which the response from the hospice programs is slow and insufficient, ineffective. The crescendo pain, somebody, infarcts their bowel and has severe abdominal pain, or starts to bleed internally, or, bleeds into their head because of thrombocytopenia, or, starts to seize, or begins to have agitation and with delirium. And well, what do you do at that point? We've been telling people for years, call hospice before you call 911. Which would be great. I want to say that, but then what happens? And in this case, I want to talk about the profit motive and its pernicious effects on hospice care in America. But in the response to symptomatic emergencies in the home, I would say that another big trend that has set us back has been the opioid epidemic, which is a true public health crisis. And it made it more difficult to respond with the sorts of scheduled medications, not only opioids, but benzodiazepines or barbiturates or even phenothiazine type medications that are needed in a hyperacute situation. I'll pause and take a breath, but I want to distinguish between for-profits and the profit motive in hospice care.
I'm sort of absorbing what you're saying and what I think, because I came to hospice much later than you did. Obviously, I've been in hospice under 15 years, but from what I have learned and what I have seen and the mentors that I have grown with throughout my career, we had a model and it became an industry, and we broke the model in the name of progress and profit. And I think in some ways, the conversations like the ones that you're having, the teaching that you're doing, the mentoring and guidance that you're providing when you speak, we're unlearning bad habits. We are going back to utilizing end-of-life doulas. End-of-life doulas would have never been necessary if hospice had continued to be present with our patients the way we should have been, the way we should be. But I think the model that we started out with back in the 70s and 80s was very skewed. And so now we're unlearning some of these things that we considered progress.
Yes, we are unlearning them. There are nurses who I've spoken with, some recently, who really never have worked in a hospice program where a doctor was actively involved. And so they look at me a little bit funny when I say it's important to have a doctor involved for, these are the sickest patients in the health system. They ought to have access to doctors who, know the pathophysiology and the impact of multiple concurrent comorbidities and the pharmacology, and can be creative in working with nurses who are the principal clinician in hospice care, always have been, but also the rest of the IDT, the social workers and chaplains, and in the larger programs, the clinical pharmacist. Having a clinical pharmacist to collaborate with the hospice physician is a brilliant thing, and can often make magic happen in terms of finding something that is effective, but also can be delivered in ways that are feasible logistically and meet the patient's and family's needs. Hospice, the highest value in our field stated has been caring for seriously ill and dying people and their families. And it's what brought me to the field and the like. But if you observationally, if you see what people do in our field, I would say that the highest value is avoiding conflict. We will do anything to avoid conflict. In our care of patients, we don't want to piss off the referring physician or the attending physician. And if we have to tolerate a patient and family suffering for inadequate care in order to avoid conflict, well, they're toast. Collectively, as a field, we have been avoiding conflict with CMS, Medicare, with the Office of the Inspector General, but also with the moneyed forces in our community. Yes, the for-profits, and it's not just the for-profits, by the way, Helen. It's the investor-owned for-profits, the ones that are traded on Wall Street, and now the private equity-owned for-profits.
Yes.
And I don't want to demonize them. They're legitimate, legal, corporate business models. But as soon as you shift from being a wholly owned, like a family-owned for-profit, and you go through what's called an IPO, right, an initial public offering, and you become traded on Wall Street, then in addition to having the primary goal of delivering the best care you can to patients and families, you also have a legitimate competing priority of returning a reasonable investment, return on your owner's investments, whether they're private equity owners or shareholders. And that creates real tensions. The reason I distinguish between for-profit and profit motive is, firstly, there are some very fine for-profits. It's not just the tax status. But there are some bad actors, and there's some legitimate reasons to return money to your investors. And so the powerful for-profits have shaped the business environment for all of hospice care. And now, for one thing, there are some big nonprofits that I would say are nonprofit in name only. They look and smell and act like for-profits in terms of staffing ratios, visit frequencies, numbers of doctors they have per patients, all of that. But I think also the pressure to succeed in the business environment has affected even the most virtuous nonprofits among us.
The Heart of Hospice is excited to connect you with Care. The owners and founders, Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire, are experts in end-of-life care with over 40 years combined experience as certified hospice and palliative nurses. They are the hospice care queens. Odonata's mission is to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. Their 32-page booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, empowers patients and their caregivers with valuable information that can be accessed anytime, day or night. Odonata Care also offers a suite of 50 free YouTube videos that teach both bedside care for the public and caregivers, and train professionals new to the practice of hospice. Odonata Care wants to support every patient admitted to hospice care. Their bottom line is caring for the patient, and that's why their motto is, Care is Treatment. Purchase copies of The Care Plan for yourself or your hospice agency at thecareplan.net. Now, back to today's episode.
I see what you're talking about with physicians. And, we are short-staffed with physicians as well as the other disciplines when it comes to hospice care. My concern is how we marginalize physician involvement. I think a lot of physicians are hired on without any experience or education, not board certified in hospice and palliative medicine. A lot of times they're hired on because they are potential referral sources.
Absolutely.
And they spend an hour or two every other week with the team. And for the most part, that's the extent of their involvement with the team, except for being aware of nurse requests for medications and troubleshooting symptoms. I think it changes the way physicians engage in hospice. And I think we haven't done ourselves any favors in the way we engage physicians. All
true. It's highly variable. I mean, there are programs where physicians are very involved, and it's like it used to be and like it should be. And, I have the privilege of interacting with some of those, but I think they are becoming exceptional. Hence the reason that I drafted this article called Core Roles and Responsibilities of Physicians in Hospice Care. I really, really want to encourage people to take a look at it because it has basically 4 sections. Section 1 is what hospice physicians are responsible for and what they do, right? And so there's a section about, the patient care responsibilities, administrative responsibilities, team building responsibilities, those sorts of things, very carefully delineated. Section 2 is what hospice physicians require to succeed in their jobs, what they require from their programs, what they require within their employment agreements, what they need in terms of having a full IDT to work with them in order to succeed. Section 3 is causes for concern, when hospice physicians should be concerned that their circumstances, their work environment, their supervision, their employment agreements, the time that's given to them to do their work, does not allow them to reliably provide safe and effective hospice care. I'll just read from a few of those from a text box in the article. When a physician is responsible for over 75 and certainly over 100 hospice patients per one FTE, and proportionately if you're only a half FTE or a quarter FTE. When you're hired solely to certify or recertify patients for Medicare or Medicaid or insurance, the usual, 3 S's: sit down, shut up, and sign.
Right.
When your nurse case managers on the IDT routinely are carrying caseloads of more than 14 patients. When you don't know what happens after hours, when you lack clarity or confidence in how after hours calls are answered and clinical emergencies are managed. So a lot of doctors just don't know, what happens when a call comes in. When your hospice program doesn't provide either or continuous home care or general inpatient care. I mean, 53% of American hospice programs did not provide any general inpatient care in 2021, even though it's a condition of participation.
Right.
When patients needing intensive symptom management are commonly discharged from hospice and admitted to an acute care hospital. And finally, when your hospice program doesn't provide bereavement services. Those are just clear indications to physicians that you may be participating in a program that cannot confidently provide good care to its patients. And you notice as I'm saying this, and that's the part 4 of the article, is you may be getting yourself into trouble though you don't know it, right? So it's a statement by and for American hospice and palliative medicine physicians, some of whom are going to be unwittingly in situations that are not ethically or clinically consistent with best practices. The statement is also, however, a reference finally for the accreditation agencies, the accountability agencies, including CMS and the state surveyors, as well as a resource we hope for future regulatory and legislative activities. Oh, and I should say, it also can be used, this statement can be referred to by referring clinicians, discharge planners, in making rational recommendations to patients and families. I'll end by saying that this statement, which again is just out online in JPM, was signed by 325 hospice and palliative medicine physicians in affirmation of its content.
I'll be sure to include a link to the JPM in the show notes so people can go in and find the article. I think it's going to be an important conversation and an important voice to add in to the movement and the changes that are taking place these days.
It's something that I've been yearning for years, been advocating that the associations on an association level do and put their imprimatur on these sorts of things. I don't think it's not extensive, and it's not even, we haven't even defined best practices, Ellen. I drafted this from the conditions of participation, the COPs, and something called the Hospice Medical Director Manual, which the Hospice Medical Director Certifying Board and the Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine published a few years ago. It actually defines or describes minimum specifications, not best practices.
It's a good start.
But it's an important start.
Yes, I agree. I want to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
As much as, we could talk for hours on end about fixing all the problems in the hospice world in the United States. But I want to go back to your personal practice in hospice and palliative medicine. You wrote a book, a very important book called The 4 Things That Matter Most. It was originally published in 2004, and you identified 4 phrases, mostly used for conflict resolution, healing relationships, but definitely very valuable at end of life. It was, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. So since you wrote that book back in 2004, would you change those phrases or would you add to them?
I think those phrases are a starter point, something that people can make their own and express in their own words. I think the sequence of starting by asking forgiveness is really important. I had an exchange with somebody earlier today about the sequence of why start there, and it's because it humbles you before people. I think, saying you're sorry, I'm sorry for things that I've done in the past that hurt your feelings, that mistreated you when I was unfair. There are very few relationships that don't have a little history of hurt feelings, misunderstandings, or real transgressions. So starting there, I think that has for me a lot of wisdom, and that flows into asking for forgiveness, expressing gratitude and love. There's a lot to be said about this. It's part of a larger practical wisdom that I've tried to advance about seeing this stage of human life through the lens of human development, not simply as a medical emergency or medical crisis, right? That this is unwanted, inherently difficult, inherently sad, often tragic, but also a normal, predictable part of human life. And, Maslow, Erickson, Piaget all said that human development was a lifelong process. I've tried to thieve from them and expand on what they taught to look at how one develops. What does human development look like during this difficult but normal stage in human life? The four things: please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you, are part of the task work of life completion, the development or relationship completion. I would only say that while, yes, I've learned them from people who were seriously ill and dying and knew that their time was short and their relationships were going to come to an end in life, they really are applicable to any day in life. If you think about life completion, not that a relationship has to end, but that as you complete a relationship, it becomes unbroken, like a circle is unbroken. It can continue to roll on, right? You can keep your relationships complete by just making sure that the people who matter most to you know that you are sorry for the things that you've done that inadvertently that have hurt them, that that you hope they can forgive you, that you're grateful for having them in your life, and that you love them. It turns out if you keep that part of your life fresh and complete, it's a lot easier when one or the other of you finds out that time is short. Or I'll tell you a story that quickly. I wrote the four things that matter most in 2002, 2003. When the galleys came out, I had to have that conversation with my mom, who was in her early 80s and with whom I had not always had a perfect relationship by any means. I started by asking her forgiveness for driving her crazy when I was a teenager and young adult, and hoped she could forgive me for that. And I forgave her for being a Jewish mother, which gets laughs, but is she was deeply loving and my biggest booster, but she was overbearing and in my life and giving me ridiculous recommendations or advice at times that was just inappropriate, and all of that stuff. And I told her, how thankful I was for her being my mom and raising me the way she did, and that I loved her. Well, all of this turned out to be really important because she died suddenly within 6 weeks of me having that conversation. She never got to see the book in its final published form, but she had read The Galleys. We had the talk, and I got to tell you, it's made it so much easier for me to grieve my mom's death because even though she died suddenly, I know there was nothing critically important left unsaid between my mom and myself.
4 simple phrases. 4 simple phrases, and yet the potential for so much growth. And you've written and talked about how you believe that people should grow, and it's healthy to grow all the way through the end of life. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm trying to get the medical part of this, because dying is a personal experience. It's not a medical set of problems to be solved. But if we don't solve the medical problems, the physical kind of conscripts our time and attention and all of our energy to our bodies and the medical, right? If we don't get our pain treated, people don't have their pain well treated, then pain will capture their time, attention, and energy. If the doctor doesn't prescribe a bowel regimen when she prescribes opioids, then the patient's going to be constipated and obstipated and, miserable. If we do that stuff right, if we get the hospice care and the palliative care parts right, if we get just general medical care right and personal and attentive, not just to diseases, but to people's well-being, then we free them to live fully during this difficult, unwanted, but normal part of human life. And we find that there is part of the human potential. I'm using Maslowian talk here, right? But there's part of human potential in this difficult but normal stage of life we call dying. That's what, if there's been an organizing principle in my career, it's been that, to get the medical right so we can elevate, protect, preserve, foster growth in the personal.
Absolutely. If you have a patient that's gasping for breath, he's not able to have those conversations. Those 4 phrases don't matter quite as much to him because he can't breathe.
Exactly. If you haven't had a bowel movement in 10 days, it's inappropriate to ask people about their spiritual life. Are you kidding me? Having a BM would be a spiritual experience at that point, right?
Exactly. So,
yeah.
So you obviously are very passionate about the work that you've been doing for so long. And I love it that the story of your mother has just perpetuated and given meaning to the book that you've written and the work that you're doing. So when you think about the work that you've done with so many patients and so many clinicians through the years, how has that work shaped how you view aging for yourself?
I think having this much proximity to dying and death, accompanying people, walking close to the fire, has only deepened and intensified my appreciation for every day. That probably sounds like a platitude, but I have to say it's really true for me. I am so aware that life is such a precious gift, but that it is a finite gift. And at my age, I have quite a few friends who are, undergoing knee replacements, have prostate or breast cancer, or, all kinds of things. And I and my wife both thankfully don't at this moment, on this day. At least if we do, it's too early to have been diagnosed, right? But that's kind of my mindset. I'm not making fun. This day is a precious gift. And so, Yvonne and I will be out taking a hike later this afternoon because it's a way of living fully in this stage of our lives. I try to keep my relationships complete so that the people who matter to me and who I think I matter to know that I love them. I'm grateful for them. I forgive them for any and everything, and I hope they can find it in their heart to do the same. All of that. That's just part of, for me, for living fully and honoring this gift that I've been given.
It's beautiful. as a hospice worker, an end-of-life worker, you realize how many gifts working in this business, in this philosophy, how many gifts they actually give us as we move through it. Yeah. Ira, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I know my listeners are going to love this conversation. I will have a link to the article and to the stat article that you wrote. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
You're very welcome. If people want to know more, I also have a website, irabyock.org, where I post pretty much everything that I write and gets published and lots of other little tidbits. I welcome your attention. And thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it. This has been a delight.
My pleasure. You can tell there's a lot more to unpack in this conversation. Goodness knows we could have talked for another hour about hospice care, where we are in this country these days, and what we can do to fix it, because Ira obviously has a lot of ideas and incredible insight that comes from years of practicing within end-of-life care. He has some interesting memories about his time as a hospice physician, remembering that he was the first person to refer a patient to hospice from his hospital when he was an intern. And he talks about how it's changed him and how he's moved through his career caring for these patients and how he has seen hospice change from a social movement into an industry, into a business. He talks about the issue of caseloads for clinicians and staffing shortages, and that goes across the spectrum when it comes to end-of-life teams. We're talking about shortages of chaplains and social workers and nurses and physicians as well. We talked about his concerns about poor responses by hospice agencies to symptom management that patients need after hours when those crises hit. One of Ira's thoughts was conflict avoiding is at the heart of a lot of our issues when it comes to how we function in end-of-life care in the hospice industry. A lot of our problems can be explained by the fact that we want to avoid conflict with referral sources, with referring physicians, with CMS, with surveyors, with shareholders for publicly traded agencies. And he has a new article that just came out in the Journal of Palliative Medicine about the roles and responsibilities of hospice physicians. And if you'll check the show notes, we're going to try to have a link there so you can go straight in and read the article. So when it comes to the 4 phrases that Ira wrote about in his book was, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. It's amazing that he had the true test of those 4 phrases and how well they work in a relationship that he is honest about wasn't the best at times when he was growing up. I think a lot of us have that same story to share about our parents, that maybe our relationships weren't that great, but he was able to have that conversation with his mother using those 4 phrases, and then she unexpectedly died later, before the book was published. But they were able to have that conversation. And he didn't use the word closure when he talked about this. He used the word completion. So I would encourage you to check out Ira's website. It's irabyock.org. So irabyock.org. You'll find his books there. You'll find several videos from speaking events that he's done. Very interesting content. If you're a hospice professional and end-of-life worker, I think you can take a lot of heart and encouragement from the work and the words of Ira Byock. So check it out, irabyock.org. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your comments and questions to me by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.